Well, welcome to the Feast of Tabernacles 2019, everyone. You know, right now we're travelers, we're sojourners, we're pilgrims, if you will, and most of us are some distance from home. You know, where we sleep, where we eat, it's very different from what we normally do at home. In fact, how many of you have eaten out in a restaurant in the last 3 days? And that was kind of one of those no-brainers, right? How many will eat out in the restaurant in the next 8 days? How many are going to go hungry? And no. Now, how many of you in the last 3 days have had a great experience at a restaurant in which you ate? Anybody have a really good experience? Yeah. How many of you had a really bad experience? Anybody? Oh, yeah, we got a few. All right. Well, you know, good food makes for a good restaurant experience. And how you are treated by the serve staff, you know, the waiters, waitresses, the host, people, to me, it makes a big difference. In fact, successful companies in the hospitality industry focus on what they call the guest experience. And you know, if you go to a great restaurant, they're all going to be similar. The food may be different, but how you're treated will be very much the same. At a great restaurant, you're going to be greeted warmly. The server will smile. Your server will introduce themselves by name. And perhaps they'll engage in some small talk with you and ask where you're from, where you're headed, what brings you to town. You'll be offered what? Something to drink. The server, if you have little kids, they may anticipate in a good restaurant the needs of the little kids because you give them, you know, a glass of water and ice, and what's the first thing they do? You know, the hand goes in, grabs the ice, you know, water spills. And so what they might do is say, would you like a lid and a straw for your children? And moms say, yes, that'd be great, thank you. And they explain the menu, right? And they tell you the specials of the day, and you may ask them for a recommendation, and they'll give you a good recommendation as far as what they like or what people seem to really like and what maybe the best offerings on the menu are. During the meal, what does the server do? In a great restaurant, they stop by, right? They top off your water, they refill your coffee cup. You know, in really fancy restaurants, they may come by and scrape the crumbs off of the table, you know. For me, that's a full-time job for the server. You know, they'll check in on you. They'll ask how the food is. If anything, you know, is overdone, underdone, they'll take it back and make it right. They'll remove empty plates. They'll inquire as to your comfort, your satisfaction. Your check at the end will be brought promptly, right? And you'll be thanked for coming. Those are some of the common components of a really great restaurant, a good dining experience. And these are examples of extending hospitality. And hospitality is, you know, it's defined as the friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors, and strangers. Now, I don't know anyone who wants to go to a restaurant and be treated without hospitality. You know, you walk in, there's no welcome. Go find a seat, sit anywhere, you don't care. The server comes up and they say, well, what do you want to eat? You know, I think, whoa. You know, you have to ask them for something to drink. The server doesn't check back in the middle of the meal. You know, they just ignore you. You have to wait and wait and wait for your bill. Now, what's that called? That's being inhospitable. And for me, that's a definite turnoff. And there's two things that put a restaurant on my I will never go back there again book. One of them is food poisoning. I experienced food poisoning in my early teenage years at a Jack in the Box restaurant in San Jose, California. I have never gone back to a Jack in the Box restaurant anywhere in the country. Why? Food poisoning. And the second is a rude, inhospitable waitstaff. And if I'm going to go there and I'm going to pay money for my meal and I'm treated rudely or there's very poor service, why would I want to go back there? Now, why would I ask you about your restaurant experience? And why should you care about the topic of hospitality? Well, in a few minutes, I'll share with you why you should care about it and what kind of a difference hospitality can make in your life. But let's go back a little bit and let's kind of drill down a little bit into hospitality. You know, the way hospitality is today has changed dramatically over the years. You know, hospitality is just in the food industry, in the restaurant industry, in the travel industry. It is way different, even than it was 10 or 15 years ago. In the old days, it was even more different. Instead of driving up to a Holiday Inn, they might knock on a stranger's door. They might go into the city square and wait for someone to invite them into their home. In most cultures, and especially in the ancient cultures, giving hospitality to a traveler, a stranger, was expected. It was valued. It was important. In fact, giving hospitality to strangers, knocking on your door, you know, that was something that was even taught by most major religions. It's a core value of societies. And when we look in the, in our world, in the Christian world, we obviously, in our nation, this is we speak English. The New Testament was written in Greek. The Old Testament mostly in Hebrew. And the words and how dealing with strangers, how that the expectations and what is used to describe that relationship, when you look at each of those three languages, there's a commonality. In English, we have the word hospitality to describe these kinds of behaviors, and it derives from a Latin word hospice, which means host, guest, or stranger. Now, in Hebrew, one of the words used most commonly, they don't really use something that describes or that is translated hospitality, but they have the word ger, and it means stranger. You remember, Gershom, it was named because he was born as a stranger in another land. And strangers in the Torah are given extra concern. I mean, it's something about which there's a focus and an attention paid. In fact, how they are treated in the community is spelled out specifically, and some of the special considerations given to widows and the poor, those same considerations are given to the ger, the strangers. In fact, God repeatedly told Israel that in their behavior towards the strangers, they were to remember that one time they were strangers in Egypt. One of the great examples of hospitality is given in the book of Genesis. And you know the story. It's in Genesis 18. And in verse 18 it says, "And the Lord appeared to him, Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, And he sat, Abraham, in the door of his tent in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. And when he saw those 3 men, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And he said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet. Rest yourselves under the tree while I bring a morsel of food that you may refresh yourself. Now, Abram's way of describing a morsel of food, I mean, he really does a nice meal for these people. This isn't just, a few scraps from the refrigerator. They didn't have refrigerators back then. But when you think about what he's doing to these 3 strangers, he welcomes them warmly. Now, the water here is, he's offering it for them to wash their feet, which was, something that was very much a custom at the time. And then he was going to feed them, give them refreshment. And after that, you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. And so they said, do as you have said. So in this most basic way of thinking about hospitality, a warm welcome, a little bit of water, a little bit of drink, a little bit of food, that's all it takes for the basic, the kind of a baseline of being hospitable. Now, in Greek, they have a word that is translated hospitality in the New Testament. Actually, they have 2 words. They're very similar. And one of them is spelled Philoxenia. It's a combination of 2 words. And the other is very similar. It's Philoxenos. And that first part, you think of Philadelphia, brotherly love, affection. And the last part, in our modern English usage, probably the closest you would hear something like that is xenophobia. And that's again from Greek, 2 words. Xeno meaning strangers and phobia being fear. And so in that context, it's the fear of strangers. But in hospitality, it's affection or love for strangers. Love for strangers. Now, those 2 words are used 4 times in the New Testament, and we can look at them real quickly. Romans 12 and verse 13, and I'm just pulling out the specific words, the phrase where it's used. There's a greater context, but the first 2 of these, the context is general instructions to Christians, and there's a kind of an enumeration of a number of things that, in this case, Paul is instructing Christians to do. And it says, distributing to the necessity of the saints, given to love of strangers, hospitality. 1 Peter 4 and verse 9, and again breaking into the context, but the example here is use hospitality one to another without grudging. And then finally, the last 2, Paul is giving instructions, and they have to do with those who are being considered for a responsibility of Christian leadership. And in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 2, it says, a bishop must be blameless, the husband of 1 wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. And then Titus 1 and verse 8, again in this same context, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, and temperate. So again, hospitality, it really is a very basic and very simple thing to do. A warm welcome, food, drink, and that's kind of the starting point, if you will, for hospitality. So I asked earlier, why should you care about restaurants? Why should you care about hospitality? Why is it important to us as a Christian? And why should we care about strangers? Why should we care about how we treat people that we don't know? Well, first, acting, you might say, exercising the simple acts of hospitality can be a means by which our personal values are shaped. You know, a value is what's important to me. And if strangers are not important to you, then that's a very low value. If caring for strangers is a very high value, then that's going to be reflected in our behaviors, and in this case, hospitality. Along with our values, character is developed, and our heart can be changed. It can be softened. It can be where we can be more considerate and compassionate towards other people. Now, for some people, hospitality, it just comes naturally. You know, it's like a little baby. You know, some babies, they act as though they've never met a stranger. You know, somebody comes, a new face is right there and says, "Oh, hi, I like you." Right? That's some people. They grow up to be like that as well. Others, it's a learned skill. And by that I mean we go through the actions of hospitality, maybe mechanically, you know, a little checklist. Okay, I need to smile. This is how servers and waitstaff, you know, are trained. You know, they're taught to smile and welcome. And sometimes they have to practice how they welcome people so it sounds welcoming. And for those who are not maybe as naturally predisposed or naturally gifted, however you might want to say it, even though we're doing it mechanically, it's still something, it's a skill that can be learned. Smile, welcome, be glad, offer food and drink, make your guests comfortable, and doing so for the people that you know and for strangers. Why should we care about it? Well, simple acts of hospitality teach us to be considerate of others first. Teaches us to be empathetic to the needs of others. Teaches us to care about others. You know, while caring about the needs of your friends is easy, caring about the needs of those people we don't know, those who are strangers to us, is more of a challenge, isn't it? And you know, Jesus knew this. Jesus knew this. And in one of his parables, he describes a situation, and it's not exactly what we're talking about with regard to hospitality, but it is talking about the difference in how easy it is to act towards friends versus those people who are strangers to us, or those people who aren't in our close circle of friends. And that's found in Luke chapter 14 and verse 12. And it's the parable of the great banquet. And he said also to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." And the concept that I want to focus on here, you know, it's real easy to do things with your friends. You invite them over, they invite you over, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But Jesus is also sharing a different concept, isn't he? And the concept here is to extend yourself, to intentionally extend yourself to people that maybe aren't in your circle of friends, maybe aren't the people that you aspire to be like, but they're people who have need. So when we consider the basic acts of hospitality, welcoming, offer food, offer drink, This is what the hospitable Christian does. The hospitable Christian does this to their friends, and the hospitable Christian does this to their strangers, the friends that aren't friends yet. They are people who they don't know. Now, the inhospitable Christian doesn't care, or they think it's someone else's job, or hospitality is women's work. Or the inhospitable Christian may be totally oblivious to the value importance of extending hospitality, and it never crosses their minds. It happens. So, how important is practicing the most simple acts of hospitality? How important is it? In Matthew chapter 25 and verse 31, it says, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him." This is talking about what? The time that we're experiencing, in type. One of the ways, there's a lot of different ways of looking at the meanings of the holy days. And one of the viewpoints is how it shows the plan of God's salvation. And when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, that's, for us, trumpets. And before him, it says, will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right hand, yay, and the goats on his left, ooh. And then the king will say to those on his right, the sheep, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And what does it say next? "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." He goes on and says, "I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me." That's basic hospitality. When do you do it? When do you practice basic hospitality? Well, you sure want to practice it when it's one of these, right? Right? But how do you know? How do you know who this stranger is? No, that's not the situation. It's not the solution to say, well, I think you might put me in the sheep category, so I'm going to be nice to you. You, yeah, I don't think so. But you might be another one of those, and I'm going to be nice to you. You don't turn this on and off. This is how we learn to behave. This is how we learn to look at other people. This is how we learn to value other people. It's how Jesus valued sinners. It's how Jesus valued his disciples. He didn't turn it on and off for one or the other. He was the same. He was authentic. He was consistent. And being a disciple of Jesus means that we offer to Jesus, we offer to God our Father to change how we think. We offer to change what we do. We offer to change what's important to us, what our values are. And if you're like me, there's a lot of things that need to be changed. One way of learning to think like Jesus is to act like him. And that teaches us love and caring for strangers. Learning to practice hospitality well can change us. And that's what Jesus wants, isn't it? He wants us to learn to be like him. And this applies to people of any age. You can be a little tyke, you can be a teenager, you can be a young adult, you can be somebody old, and it applies to all of us. Every person can learn to be welcoming, look at the needs of others, be considerate, compassionate, empathetic. And really, is there a better place for us to practice and to learn how to love strangers than right at the Feast of Tabernacles? There's a lot of people that are strangers to you because you just don't know them. But this is a wonderful place to meet them. In fact, when you think about the opportunities, now some people, they're great cooks and they want to have people over. Sometimes, being hospitable is looking out for somebody. Maybe they don't have anybody to go out to eat with, and you invite them to come with you. We've done things where we've had potlucks. People bring their own food. We've done, kind of a bring your own dessert type of a thing. A lot of this has to do with eating, and that's a good thing, isn't it? I think so. In fact, on Friday night, we set aside, we don't do other activities Friday evening. Even we used to do a Bible study, and we've taken that away so that night is an opportunity everyone can have to be hospitable. Invite somebody, you can invite friends over, but invite somebody new. Make friends with a stranger. Broaden your circle of friends. Practice hospitality. Being hospitable is how Jesus described the sheep who are welcomed into his kingdom. Being inhospitable is acting like a goat. Don't be a goat. Have a great feast, everybody.